The courtroom is quiet when the judge finishes speaking. No music, no dramatic movement, just the sound of a gavel striking wood, and a sentence that lasts a few seconds. To most people watching, it looks like the end of the story. The cameras stop rolling. The lawyers pack their files. The spectators leave their seats. But for the person standing in chains, this is not the end. It is the exact moment their life stops being their own. The instant the judge speaks, a hidden system activates, silently, efficiently, and without explanation. A system that does not announce itself. A system that does not offer appeals, explanations, or warnings. A system that begins making decisions long before the inmate ever sees a prison gate. From that moment forward, nothing happens by chance. Behind the courtroom doors, paperwork is already moving. Digital records are updated across state and federal databases. Court clerks transmit sentencing documents to correctional agencies, classification units, and transportation coordinators. Each form contains more than just a sentence length. It contains the data that will determine where a human being will spend years, decades, or the rest of their life. This process does not wait for the inmate to leave the building. It begins immediately. Within minutes, the individual is no longer treated as a person with a name, a family, or a future. They become an entry in a system designed around control, risk management, and containment. A system built not to rehabilitate, but to organize bodies behind walls. Most inmates believe they are being sent to prison. What they don't realize is that there is no single prison waiting for them. Instead, there is a nationwide network of facilities, security levels, transfer hubs, and classification centers, each designed for a specific type of inmate. And once the judge speaks, the system begins deciding exactly where that person fits. The inmate is rarely told what's happening. They are escorted out of the courtroom, processed, and returned to a holding cell, often in the same county jail they've been sitting in for months. From the outside, it looks like nothing has changed, but everything has. That holding cell is no longer temporary detention. It becomes a staging area, a quiet waiting room before a long journey through a system that operates far beyond public view. In the hours after sentencing, correctional authorities begin assembling a profile, not just the crime that was just judged, but the entire history of the person now entering custody. Past arrests, prior convictions, dismissed charges, behavior while incarcerated, mental health records, gang intelligence files, even details the inmate may not remember or never knew existed, are pulled into the system and evaluated. This is not about fairness. It is not about rehabilitation. It is about predicting problems before they happen. The system asks one question above all others. How much control will this person require? From that single question, everything else follows. Sentence length becomes a critical factor. Someone sentenced to 5 years is treated very differently from someone sentenced to 30. Life sentences are treated differently still. The longer the sentence, the more the system assumes there is nothing to lose, and the more control it believes is necessary. Violence history is weighed heavily. Not just convictions, but allegations, associations, patterns. Any behavior that suggests resistance or instability is flagged. Mental health evaluations are not used primarily to provide care. They are used to determine management risk. Conditions that require supervision or medication often result in tighter restrictions, not support. Age, background, and even geography play a role. Where the crime occurred, which facilities are overcrowded, which prisons have staffing shortages, which states are under federal scrutiny. All of these factors influence decisions that the inmate will never see and cannot challenge. At no point is the inmate asked where they want to go. They are not given a list of facilities. They are not told how long the process will take. They are not warned when the next move will happen. For families, the silence is often worse. Phone calls become shorter, then disappear. Attorneys struggle to get information. Online inmate locators lag behind real movement. Loved ones assume the inmate will stay nearby. They assume transfers will be explained. They assume someone will call. Most of the time, no one does. Because secrecy is not a flaw in this system, it is a feature. Transfers are planned without notice. Routes are kept confidential. Destinations are withheld to prevent interference, escape attempts, or outside pressure. Even correctional officers often receive limited information until the last moment. The inmate may wake up one morning believing nothing has changed, and by nightfall, they are hundreds of miles away, cut off from everyone they know. By the time the transport doors close, the most important decisions have already been made. Where you will live, how much freedom you will have, how much isolation you will endure, how difficult it will be to see your family, all decided by a system that never introduced itself. The judge may have spoken in public, but the real sentence is carried out in private. And once this system takes over, getting your life back is no longer part of the plan. This documentary exposes what happens after the verdict, the hidden machinery of classification, transfer, and control, and why once the judge speaks, your life no longer belongs to you. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. When the judge finishes reading the sentence, most people believe the decision is complete. The number of years has been spoken. The punishment has been announced. Justice, in the public eye, has been served. But inside the system, that moment is not an ending. It is a trigger. The second a sentence is officially entered into the court record, a different process begins. One that has nothing to do with guilt or innocence, and everything to do with control. This process does not happen in the courtroom, and it does not involve public hearings, juries, or televised trials. It unfolds quietly, through paperwork, databases, and internal decisions that will shape the rest of an inmate's life. Within minutes of sentencing, court clerks finalize documents that formally transfer custody. These records are sent to correctional authorities, probation departments, and centralized prison systems. The inmate's legal identity changes instantly. They are no longer someone awaiting judgment. They are now a correctional responsibility. This change matters more than most people realize. Before sentencing, the inmate exists within the court system. After sentencing, they become part of a massive correctional network that spans counties, states, and federal jurisdictions. From this point on, decisions are no longer made by judges. They are made by administrators, classification officers, and security planners. And those decisions begin immediately. Most inmates are returned to a county jail after sentencing, at least temporarily. To families watching from the outside, this can feel reassuring. It looks familiar. It feels like nothing has changed. But inside the system, that county jail is no longer a holding space. It becomes a processing zone. The inmate is now an intake. This is where the system begins to gather everything it needs to decide what kind of prisoner this person will be. Correctional staff begin compiling a comprehensive institutional profile. This profile goes far beyond the crime that led to sentencing. It reaches backward through years, sometimes decades, of history. Every prior arrest is examined, even those that never resulted in conviction. Past probation violations are flagged. Previous time spent in jail or prison is reviewed. Disciplinary reports from earlier incarcerations are pulled. Nothing is considered irrelevant. The system is not asking whether the inmate has changed. It is asking whether the inmate can be managed. Sentence length becomes one of the most important factors at this stage. Long sentences signal long-term exposure to the prison system, which increases institutional risk. An inmate serving 5 years is treated very differently from someone serving 30. Life sentences are treated differently still. The longer the sentence, the more the system assumes that incentives matter less, and control matters more. Violence history is weighed heavily, but not always in the way the public expects. It is not just acts of violence that raise concern, it is patterns. Resistance to authority, infractions during detention, arguments with staff. Anything that suggests difficulty complying with rules becomes part of the calculation. Mental health information is also reviewed, but not primarily to ensure treatment. Psychological diagnoses, medication needs, and past suicide risks are documented because they affect risk management. In many cases, mental illness increases perceived institutional complexity, which can push inmates toward higher levels of restriction rather than care. The system's priority is stability, not recovery. At no point during this process is the inmate asked for input. They are not consulted about placement. They are not told which facilities are being considered. They are not given a timeline. In fact, many inmates are intentionally kept uninformed. Uncertainty reduces resistance. Confusion discourages planning. The system operates on the assumption that the less an inmate knows, the easier they are to move. Families are often the first to feel the impact. After sentencing, communication becomes unpredictable. Phone privileges may be reduced or suspended. Visitation rules change without explanation. Attorneys struggle to obtain information about where their clients will be sent or when transfers might occur. Loved ones are left guessing. Will the inmate stay nearby? Will they be moved out of state? Will they be transferred multiple times? The system does not consider these questions a priority. Behind the scenes, coordination has already begun. Transportation units start planning movement schedules. Facilities report available bed space. Classification officers compare inmate profiles against institutional needs. Overcrowding plays a major role here. If one prison is over capacity and another has empty beds, inmates will be moved to balance the system, regardless of family proximity or personal circumstances. Geography becomes secondary to logistics. An inmate sentenced in one state may end up housed hundreds or thousands of miles away. These decisions are rarely reversible. Once a placement path is chosen, it becomes the default. Appeals are technically possible, but practically ineffective. The system favors efficiency over individual reconsideration. For the inmate, this period is defined by waiting. Days pass, weeks pass, sometimes months. Life in the county jail becomes a limbo state. No longer pretrial, not yet prison. Inmates wait without knowing when the next move will happen or what conditions await them. Then, without warning, the process accelerates. A name is called. Belongings are limited. Paperwork is signed without explanation, and the inmate is told to move. By the time they realize something has changed, the most important decisions have already been made. The verdict may have determined the length of the sentence. But it is here, in this silent phase after the courtroom empties, that the system begins deciding how that sentence will be lived. And the inmate is only one step deeper inside a machine they no longer control. Long before an inmate ever arrives at a permanent prison, the system has already decided who they are supposed to be. This decision happens during classification, a process that quietly shapes the rest of an inmate's life, yet remains almost completely invisible to the public. Classification is not a conversation. It is not a hearing. And it is not designed to be fair. It is designed to control. Once sentencing paperwork is finalized and the inmate enters intake status, classification units begin their work. These units exist at the state and federal level, staffed by analysts, correctional officers, psychologists, and administrators whose responsibility is not justice, but predictability. The goal of classification is simple: to determine how much of a problem an inmate might become. To do that, the system builds a comprehensive risk profile. This profile is assembled from databases that stretch across jurisdictions and time. The inmate's current conviction is only one piece of the puzzle, often not even the most important one. Criminal history is examined in full. Every prior arrest is logged, even those that ended in dismissal or acquittal. Prior convictions are weighted heavily, especially if they involve violence, weapons, or repeat offenses. Past probation or parole violations signal noncompliance, a red flag for the system. But classification goes deeper than official records. Institutional behavior matters just as much. How the inmate behaved in county jail, whether they followed rules, whether they argued with staff, whether they filed grievances. Even minor disciplinary infractions can be interpreted as resistance to authority. To the system, these behaviors suggest future management challenges. This is where many inmates are quietly pushed into harsher categories, not because of what they did on the street, but because of how they behaved under confinement. Sentence length becomes one of the most powerful variables. An inmate serving a short sentence is treated as a temporary presence. The system expects compliance, cooperation, and eventual release. But long sentences tell a different story. When the system sees decades, or life, it assumes permanence. Long-term inmates are classified with the expectation that they will age, adapt, and potentially influence others inside. This perceived influence increases their risk profile, regardless of personal intent. The longer the sentence, the more the system believes that incentives lose their power and control must increase. Mental health evaluations are folded into this process, but not in the way most people imagine. Psychological assessments are conducted to identify diagnoses, medication needs, and behavioral risks. But within the classification system, mental illness is often treated as a management problem, not a health issue. Conditions such as severe depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, or documented suicide risk can elevate an inmate's custody level. not because they are dangerous, but because they require supervision. In practice, this often means more restrictions, not more care. Gang intelligence plays a significant role as well. Correctional agencies maintain extensive databases on suspected gang affiliations. Membership does not always need to be proven. Tattoos, associations, past housing placements, or information from other inmates can be enough to trigger classification flags. Once labeled, the designation follows the inmate indefinitely. Challenging it is nearly impossible. The system operates on assumption, not proof. All of these factors are translated into scores. Most jurisdictions use point-based classification systems. Each variable adds or subtracts points. Violence increases points. Long sentences increase points. Prior infractions increase points. Mental health complexity increases points. The final score determines custody level, minimum, medium, close, maximum, or administrative segregation. This single label dictates nearly every aspect of prison life: where you will be housed, how often you leave your cell, who you can interact with, whether you can work, whether you can attend programs, whether you can touch your family during visits. And once assigned, custody levels are incredibly difficult to change. The system is designed to escalate quickly and de-escalate slowly, if at all. One incident can raise a custody level permanently. A fight, a verbal confrontation, an accusation, even being present during unrest can be enough. The system does not require certainty, only justification. What makes classification even more powerful is that it is heavily influenced by institutional needs. Overcrowding reshapes outcomes constantly. If lower security facilities are full, inmates may be pushed upward. If a high-security prison has open beds, inmates may be sent there simply to fill space. Staffing shortages, facility closures, and budget constraints all influence decisions that are framed as security necessities. From the outside, it looks arbitrary. Inside the system, it is logistical efficiency. This is why two inmates with similar crimes and sentences can experience completely different prison lives. One may land in a medium security facility with movement privileges and programming. Another may be placed in a high security environment where isolation and lockdowns are routine. Not because one is worse, but because the system needed them to fit somewhere. Perhaps most importantly, classification is ongoing. Inmates are constantly reevaluated. Behavior is monitored. Reports are filed. Scores are adjusted. Every interaction with staff becomes data. The system remembers everything. Good behavior may slow escalation, but it rarely erases past labels. Once an inmate is viewed as high risk, that identity becomes permanent. Redemption is not part of the design. By the time classification is complete, the inmate's future has already been decided. Before they ever see razor wire. Before they ever step inside a housing unit. Before they ever learn the rules of their new world. They have been reduced to a score, a designation, and a level of control. And the next phase will enforce that decision physically. Because once classification is finished, the system prepares to move you, often without warning, to the place it believes you belong. Once classification is finalized, the system does not pause. It does not notify families. It does not prepare the inmate. It moves. This phase is known simply as transfer, but that word hides one of the most disruptive and psychologically destabilizing experiences in the entire prison process. Transfers are not scheduled events from the inmate's point of view. There is no countdown, no posted notice, no explanation of where you are going or why. In most cases, inmates learn they are being transferred only minutes before it happens. A correctional officer calls a name. Property limits are announced. Handcuffs are applied. And just like that, movement begins. This is intentional. The prison system treats inmate movement as a high-risk operation. Advance notice creates opportunities for resistance, escape planning, outside coordination, or emotional escalation. So the system removes certainty. Confusion becomes a control tool. In many cases, the inmate is not even told the destination. You may be told to pack up. You may be told to step out. You may be told nothing at all. Paperwork is signed without explanation. Questions are ignored. Officers often do not have full information themselves. They are given orders, not reasons. Transfers can begin at any hour. Early morning, late at night, during count. There is no right time, because the system does not care about routine, only compliance. Once movement begins, the inmate enters a transportation network that most people never see. This network spans counties, states, and federal jurisdictions. It includes buses, vans, airplanes, temporary holding facilities, and regional transfer centers designed purely for movement. These journeys are rarely direct. An inmate may be moved from a county jail to a regional hub, from there to another holding facility, then to a different hub, then finally to a permanent prison. Each stop can last hours, days, or weeks. During transfer, access to basic rights is reduced. Phone calls are limited or completely unavailable. Legal materials are often inaccessible. Personal property may be delayed, lost, or restricted. In some cases, inmates arrive at a new facility before their paperwork does. This creates a dangerous gap, one where inmates exist in the system without clear status, increasing vulnerability and confusion. Transportation conditions are deliberately harsh. Long hours and restraints, minimal movement, limited bathroom access, inconsistent food and water. These are not accidental oversights. They are built into the process to reduce resistance. Physical discomfort discourages confrontation. Fatigue increases compliance. The message is clear. You are being moved, and you have no control over it. Families often experience this phase as sudden silence. Phone calls stop. Visitation appointments are canceled. Online inmate locators show outdated information, if they update at all. Loved ones may not know where the inmate is for days or even weeks. Attorneys frequently struggle to track clients through the transfer chain. In some cases, legal deadlines are missed simply because no one knows where the inmate has been taken. The system does not consider this a problem. In fact, distance is often the point. By transferring inmates far from their home regions, the system weakens outside support networks. Family visits become expensive or impossible. Relationships fade. External scrutiny decreases. The inmate becomes easier to manage when fewer people are watching. This is especially common for inmates serving long sentences or life without parole. Proximity to family is not a priority. Stability is not a priority. Capacity is. Overcrowding drives many transfers. If one prison is full and another has space, inmates will be moved, regardless of classification compatibility or personal circumstances. Inmates become inventory, shifted to balance numbers across a network that is constantly under strain. This is why inmates with similar sentences can experience vastly different transfer paths. One may go directly to a permanent facility. Another may bounce between multiple holding centers for months, not because of behavior, but because of logistics. When the inmate finally arrives at their destination, the transfer is technically over, but the psychological impact remains. Disorientation, exhaustion, isolation. The inmate steps into an environment they were never prepared for, governed by rules they do not yet understand, surrounded by people who already know how the system works. And this is where the classification decision becomes real. Because the prison you are sent to is not neutral. It reflects what the system believes about you, your risk, your future behavior, your value to the institution. The walls, the routines, the restrictions, all of it enforces the judgment made long before you ever arrived. The transfer does not just move your body. It locks your fate into place. And once you step inside, changing that fate becomes almost impossible. When an inmate finally arrives at their assigned prison, the system's most important decision reveals itself. Not the sentence length, not the crime, but the security level. This is where classification stops being paperwork and becomes daily reality. Security level is not just a label. It is a blueprint for how much freedom, contact, and humanity an inmate will be allowed to experience. In the American prison system, security levels exist to answer one question above all others. How tightly does this person need to be controlled? Every prison is designed around a specific level of custody. The architecture, staffing, routines, and restrictions are all built to enforce that level. Once an inmate is placed, the environment itself becomes part of the punishment. At the lowest end of the spectrum are minimum security facilities. These institutions are often described as low risk, but that description is misleading. Minimum security is not about trust. It is about cost and manageability. Inmates housed here are usually serving shorter sentences, nearing release, or classified as unlikely to cause disruption. Movement is less restricted. Dormitory-style housing is common. Inmates may work outside secure perimeters, participate in education programs, and interact more freely with others. From a distance, these facilities barely resemble the prisons most people imagine. But minimum security is rare. The majority of inmates are placed into medium security prisons, where control becomes more visible and more constant. Cells replace dorms. Doors lock electronically. Movement is scheduled, counted, and monitored. Surveillance is everywhere. Daily life becomes regulated down to the minute. Wake-up times, meal times, recreation periods, counts, multiple times a day, every day. Minor infractions matter here. A missed count, an argument, or a rule violation can result in lockdowns, loss of privileges, or a change in housing. The system begins conditioning behavior through restriction. Then there is maximum security, where the system assumes the worst. Maximum security prisons are designed for inmates considered highly dangerous, difficult to manage, or influential inside prison culture. The architecture itself is a warning. Thick concrete walls, reinforced doors, razor wire, gun towers, and layers of controlled movement. In these facilities, freedom is minimal. Inmates spend most of their time inside cells. Movement occurs under escort. Interaction with other inmates is limited and closely supervised. Lockdowns are frequent and can last for days or weeks without notice. Here, compliance is not encouraged, it is enforced. For some inmates, even maximum security is not considered enough. This is where administrative segregation enters the picture. Often referred to as the hole, administrative segregation is used to isolate inmates the system believes pose a threat to staff, to other inmates, or to institutional order. Placement does not always require a violent act. Suspicion, intelligence reports, or perceived influence can be enough. In segregation, isolation becomes the punishment. Cells are smaller. Time outside is extremely limited. Human contact is reduced to brief, controlled interactions. For some inmates, this becomes a long-term or even permanent condition. What makes security levels so powerful is that they dictate every aspect of existence inside prison. Visitation changes dramatically. In lower security settings, visits may involve physical contact, shared tables, and conversation. In higher security settings, visits are conducted through glass partitions or monitored phones. Physical contact disappears. Work opportunities also vanish as security increases. Jobs that offer movement, purpose, or small income are often unavailable to higher custody inmates. Education programs become limited or non-existent. Recreation is restricted or eliminated. Even medical care is affected. Higher security inmates are often transported in restraints, limiting access to treatment. Appointments may be delayed or canceled due to staffing or security concerns. Mental health care, when provided, is often reactive rather than preventive. What is rarely acknowledged is that security levels are not based solely on behavior. They are based on the system's capacity to manage. Overcrowding plays a decisive role. If lower security facilities are full, inmates may be pushed into higher security environments simply because space is available. Staffing shortages can also increase restrictions. A prison that cannot safely supervise movement may default to lockdown. In these situations, security level becomes less about the inmate and more about the institution's limitations. Once an inmate is placed at a higher level, moving down is extremely difficult. The system is designed to escalate quickly and relax slowly. Good behavior may prevent further punishment, but it rarely leads to meaningful improvement in conditions. Past labels remain attached. Prior incidents remain in the record. Suspicion lingers. The system does not reward redemption, it avoids risk. Over time, this environment reshapes behavior. Inmates adapt to constant surveillance. They learn silence. They learn routine. They learn that standing out is dangerous. For some, prolonged exposure to high-security conditions erodes mental stability, increases anxiety, and hardens emotional responses. This is not a flaw of the system. It is a byproduct the system accepts. Because security levels are not designed to rehabilitate. They are designed to contain. By the time an inmate understands what their security level truly means, the reality has already settled in. The judge decided how long the sentence would be. The prison system decided how that sentence would feel. And for many inmates, the security level they are placed in becomes a sentence within the sentence. one that defines their daily suffering far more than the number of years on paper. For inmates serving short sentences, prison is something to endure. For inmates serving long sentences, prison becomes something else entirely. And for those sentenced to life, or to decades so long they function like life, the system stops pretending there is an end goal. This is the point where time loses its meaning. Once an inmate is classified as long-term or life sentenced, the prison system begins treating them differently, not officially, not in writing, but in practice. These inmates are no longer viewed as people moving toward release. They are viewed as permanent fixtures inside the system. The assumption is simple. This person is not going home. That assumption reshapes everything. Long-term inmates are managed with containment in mind, not rehabilitation. Educational programs, vocational training, and reentry preparation quietly lose relevance. Incentives that exist for short-term inmates, parole hearings, early release credits, halfway houses, do not apply here. The system no longer asks, how do we prepare this person for society? It asks, how do we manage this person for the next 20, 30, or 40 years? This shift is subtle, but devastating. Life-sentenced inmates are often housed in higher security facilities even when their behavior is stable. The reasoning is not punishment, it is influence. The system believes long-term inmates accumulate power over time. Experience turns into knowledge. Knowledge turns into status. Status turns into control. Whether that belief is accurate or not doesn't matter. The system acts on it. As a result, life-sentenced inmates are often subjected to stricter movement rules, closer surveillance, and fewer opportunities. Even perfect behavior does not guarantee improvement in conditions. The label itself becomes the barrier. For these inmates, prison life settles into a cycle that rarely changes. Same cell, same tier, same routines. Days blur into weeks, weeks into years, years into decades. The outside world moves on without them. Families age, parents die, children grow up. Visits become less frequent, not because families stop caring, but because distance, cost, and emotional exhaustion take their toll. Phone calls become shorter. Letters slow down. Eventually, silence fills the gaps. The system does not intervene to preserve these connections. In fact, isolation often works in its favor. An inmate with fewer outside ties is easier to manage. There is less pressure, fewer complaints, and less scrutiny. Over time, many life-sentenced inmates become socially invisible, known only by an identification number and a housing assignment. Psychologically, this is where prison does its deepest damage. Without a future milestone, no release date, no parole hearing, no finish line, motivation erodes. Purpose disappears. Some inmates withdraw entirely, existing in a state of emotional shutdown. Others cling to routine as survival. A few resist, becoming disciplinary problems the system uses to justify further restriction. Mental health issues are common here, but rarely addressed meaningfully. Depression becomes normalized. Anxiety is ignored. Hopelessness is treated as compliance. Counseling, when available, is often minimal and reactive. The system's priority is preventing disruption, not restoring well-being. For inmates serving life without parole, the message is unspoken but clear. You are here to die in custody. There is no preparation for that reality. No ceremony. No acknowledgement. Just years accumulating inside concrete walls. Even inmates serving extremely long determinate sentences, 40, 50, 60 years, experience a similar fate. Technically, they may have a release date. Practically, it exists beyond their expected lifespan. The system treats them as permanent. Transfers slow down. Housing assignments become fixed. Reclassification becomes rare. Once placed, they tend to stay where they are, sometimes for decades, unless overcrowding or facility closures force movement. In these environments, power dynamics intensify. Long-term inmates learn the unwritten rules. They understand staff routines, institutional rhythms, and social hierarchies. Some become stabilizing forces. Others become symbols of permanence, reminders to newer inmates of what happens when time never ends. Correctional staff interact with them differently too. Some officers develop professional familiarity. Others maintain distance. A few grow openly dismissive. The inmate becomes less of a person and more of a constant, part of the background of the prison itself. What makes this stage especially cruel is that it rarely matches public perception. The public imagines life sentences as active punishment, constant discipline, strict control, ongoing consequence. In reality, the punishment is monotony, isolation, irrelevance, the slow erasure of identity. The system does not need to be violent to be devastating. It simply needs to last forever. By the time an inmate reaches this stage, the judge's words from years ago echo differently. The sentence was not just a number. It was a declaration that the system would own the rest of their life. No appeals, no explanations, no way back. And for those watching from the outside, this reality is rarely seen. Because the most powerful punishment in the American prison system is not the sentence itself. It is what happens after the system realizes you are never leaving. Once the judge speaks, the courtroom empties. The trial ends. The public moves on. But for the inmate, the sentence does not end when the gavel falls. It expands. What this documentary has revealed is not a single prison, a single policy, or a single decision. It is a system, layered, hidden, and largely invisible, that takes control long after the cameras are gone. A system that classifies people into risk scores, that moves them across states without warning, that decides how tightly they will be controlled, that quietly determines whether their future includes hope or only endurance. The judge decides how long the sentence will be, but the prison system decides how that time will be lived. For some, it means constant movement and instability. For others, it means isolation behind reinforced doors. For those serving life or decades-long sentences, it means watching the outside world disappear while time inside loses all meaning. This system does not announce itself. It does not explain its choices, and it rarely allows its decisions to be challenged. Families are left searching for answers. Inmates are left navigating rules they were never taught. And the public is left believing the story ends at sentencing. It doesn't. Behind every prison wall is a network of classifications, transfers, security levels, and long-term management strategies designed not for justice, but for control. A system built to function quietly, efficiently, and indefinitely. Understanding this system does not mean excusing crime. It means recognizing what punishment actually looks like once the courtroom doors close. Because once the judge speaks, a different authority takes over. One that controls where you go, how you live, who you see, and whether hope survives at all. And that system is not seen until you are inside it. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.